So let's continue from the last video. I don't know why was let's say abruptly cut, but let's continue in the same paragraph. So the most successful of the autotrophs were those in which a system evolved from making direct use of the sun's energy. That is the process of photosynthesis. The earliest photosynthetic organisms, although simple in comparison with plants, were much more complex than the primitive heterotrophs. Use of the sun's energy required a complex pigment system to capture the light energy and link to this system a way to store the energy in an organic molecule. Evidence of the activities of photosynthetic organisms has been found in rocks 3.4 billion years old, about 100 million years after the first fossil evidence of life on Earth. We can be almost certain, however, that both life and photosynthetic organisms evolved considerable earlier than the evidence suggests. In addition, there seems to be no doubt that heterotrophs evolved before autotrophs. With the arrival of autotrophs, the flow of energy in the biosphere, that is, the living world and its environment, came to assume its modern form. Radiant energy from the sun channeled through the photosynthetic autotrophs to all other forms of life. So, and now let's continue a little bit more. I hope it's you can listen properly in with good sound, good quality of sound. Photosynthesis altered Earth's atmosphere, which in turn influenced the evolution of life. As photosynthetic organisms increased in number, they changed the face of the planet. This biological revolution came about because photosynthesis typically involves splitting the water molecule H, the water molecule, two oxygens and one hydrogen. So the water molecule is and, and releasing its oxygen as free oxygen molecules, O2. Prior to 2.2 billion years ago, the oxygen released into oceans and lakes reacted with dissolved iron and precipitated as iron oxides. From about 2.7 to 2.2 billion years ago, oxygen began gradually to accumulate in the atmosphere. By about 700 million years ago, atmospheric levels of oxygen increased markedly, and began to approach modern levels during the Cambrian period, 570 to 510 million years ago. This increase in oxygen level had two important consequences. First, some of the oxygen molecules in the outer layer of the atmosphere were converted to ozone, O3 molecules. When there is sufficient quantity of ozone in the atmosphere, it absorbs the ultraviolet ultra ultraviolet was ultraviolet or ultraviolet ultra ultra ultra. Let's check this. Ultraviolet.
Ultraviolet. Ultraviolet. Ultraviolet.
Ultraviolet. So ultraviolet, it absorbs the ultraviolet rays. Rays highly destructive to living organisms from the sunlight that reaches the Earth by By about 450 million years ago, the ozone layer apparently protected organisms sufficiently so they could survive in the surface layers of water and on the shores, and life emerged on land for the first time. So it's the crucial moment in life on Earth. Yeah? It's very, very well explained. Of course, no in the great detail as you can expect it, but okay, let's put this book is really enormous, huge book, and I have to share the space with the microphone, the mobile phone, the computer. Okay, I have to think about how to improve this. So let's continue a little bit more. Second, the increase in free oxygen opened the way to a much more efficient utilization of the energy-rich carbon-containing molecules formed by photosynthesis. It enabled organisms to break down those molecules by the oxygen-utilizing process known as respiration. As discussed in Chapter 6, respiration yields far more energy that can be extracted by any anaerobic or oxygenless process. So, respiration is a really good invent in order to extract more energy than anaerobic. It's important. That's the reason you can run for 1.5 hours with, let's say, by correct breathing. But if you go too fast, you can only last about 1.5 or 2 minutes. Let's continue. Before the atmosphere accumulated oxygen and became aerobic, the only cells that existed were prokaryotic, simple cells that lacked a nuclear envelope and did not have their genetic material organized into complex chromosomes. It is likely that the first prokaryotes were heat-loving organisms called archaea. Archaea. How is this word? Archaea. Arcaico. Arcaeas. Arcaica. In Spanish. Archaea.
Archaea.
Archaea. Archaea.
Archaea.
Archaea. Archaea. Archaea. Okay. So, heat-loving organisms called archaea, meaning ancient ones, the descendants of which are now known to be widespread, with many thriving at extremely high temperatures and in acid environments hostile to other forms of life. Bacteria are also prokaryotes. Some are archaea. Archaea. Some archaea and bacteria are heterotrophic, and others such as the cyanobacteria are autotrophic. According to the fossil record, the increase of relatively abundant free oxygen was accompanied by the first appearance of eukaryotic cells with nuclear envelopes, complex chromosomes, and organelles, such as mitochondria, sites of respiration, and chloroplast, sites of photosynthesis, surrounded by membranes. Eukaryotic organisms, in which the individual cells are usually much larger than those of the bacteria, appeared about 2.1 billion years ago and were well established and diverse by 1.2 billion years ago, except for archaea, except for archaea and bacteria, all organisms from amoebas, I don't know, amebas, como se dice, amebas,
Amoebas.
From amoebas to dandelions, dientes de león, dandelions, yeah, to dandelions, to oak trees, robles. So from amoebas, las amebas, to dandelions, dientes de león, to oak trees, to human beings, o sea, desde las amebas, los dientes de león, los robles, los árboles, los robles, y los humanos are composed of one or more eukaryotic cells. O sea, estamos compuestos también de las células eucarióticas, excepto las bacterias y las arqueas, los arcaicos. Let's continue a little bit more. Just, let's say, 3 paragraphs more. The seashore environment was important in the evolution of photosynthetic organisms. Early in evolutionary history, the principal photosynthetic organisms were microscopic cells floating below the surface of the sunlit waters. Energy abounded as did carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but as the cellular colonies multiplied, they quickly depleted the mineral resources of the open ocean. It is this shortage of essential minerals that is the limiting factor in any modern plans to harvest the seas. It's curious. So the lack of essential minerals in the seawater is what determines the, let's say, problem with harvesting in the sea, the plants, harvesting plants, of course. As a consequence, life began to develop more abundantly toward the source, toward hacia,
Toward.
Okay. As a consequence, life began to develop more abundantly toward the source, where the waters were rich in nitrates and minerals, yes, should be.
Minerals.
And minerals carried down from the mountains by rivers and streams and scraped from the coasts by the ceaseless waves, incesantes olas, ceaseless waves. The rocky coast presented a much more complicated environment than the open sea, and in response to these evolutionary pressures, living organisms became increasingly complex in structure and more diversified. Not less than 650 million years ago, organisms evolved in which many cells were linked together to form an integrated multicellular body. In these primitive organisms, we see the early stages in the evolution of plants, fungi, and animals. Fossils of multicellular organisms are much easier to detect than those of simpler ones. The history of life on Earth, therefore, is much better documented from the time of their first appearance. On the turbulent shore, multicellular photosynthetic organisms were better able to maintain their position against the action of the waves, and in meeting the challenge of the rocky coast, new forms developed. Typically, these new forms developed relatively strong cell walls for support, as well as specialized structures to anchor the bodies to the rocky surfaces. As these organisms increased in size, they were confronted with the problem of how to supply food to the dimly. What does it mean? Dimly. Escaso. Tenue. Dimly lit. Tenuemente iluminado. Dimly lit. More deeply submerged portions of their bodies where photosynthesis was not taking place. So where photosynthesis was not taking place. Eventually, specialized food conducting tissues evolved that extended the length of the bodies of these organisms and connected the upper photosynthesizing parts with the lower non-photosynthesizing structures. So, it's curious. Eventually, specialized food-conducting tissues, unos tissues que transmitían la alimentación, evolucionó, alargando el cuerpo de estos organismos y conectando la parte superior con la parte inferior, que la parte superior era digamos, fotosintética, podía, digamos, transformar, hacer reacciones de fotosíntesis. I'm sorry, I'm in Spanish now. So they were specialized, the bottom and the upper part. The upper part was with photosynthesizing parts, and the lower was non-photosynthesizing structures, like the roots, or let's say the internode, because it's the root and the shoot. The root below the earth and the shoot is upper. Okay, let's continue. No, let's stop here because it's really interesting, this book. I'm going to put here a mark because we will continue next week again with this short reading. You know that here the goal of this, let's say, program is to practice your pronunciation. You just need an English book and just a phone or a tablet where you can write down the word that you want to pronounce better, or if you have questions, you just try, and then you even can learn. With this, you can learn easily more vocabulary. The most important part is the repetition. You just have to introduce and then repeat.
Dimly,
But more time.
dimly,
Don't worry about
dimly,
fail. Dimly. No problem. You can repeat 100 times, And then it's fixing your brain for the next time, because the repetition is one of the key points. Another is the for sure the habit of reading English books every week. Is okay, but as the more you read, the more you practice, the more you improve, for sure. Okay, friends, have a really good Saturday night and see you in 1 week. See you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.